The autumn wind carried the scent of rain as Abigail Blackwell stared up at the weathered two-story farmhouse, nestled among the rolling hills of Wyoming Territory, 1876. Her journey from Boston had been long and arduous, but now that she stood before what would be her home for the foreseeable future, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The letter from Mr. Ethan James had been straightforward: a widower seeking a governess for his 9-year-old son in the frontier town of Sweetwater Springs. What the letter hadn't mentioned was the isolation, the vastness of the land that stretched as far as the eye could see, or the haunted look in the eyes of the man now approaching her from the barn. "Miss Blackwell, I presume?" His voice was deep, roughened by years in the elements. Ethan James stood tall, his shoulders broad beneath a worn cotton shirt. His face was sun-bronzed and weathered, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, piercing blue, like the sky after a storm, and filled with a wariness that made her heart ache. "Yes, Mr. James. Thank you for meeting me." Abigail straightened her back, determined not to show how overwhelmed she felt. At 23, she had left behind everything familiar to take this position. The Boston Ladies' Academy where she had taught had closed after financial troubles, and with no family to support her, the advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like providence. "Hope your journey wasn't too difficult." He reached for her trunk, lifting it with ease. "Not many women willing to come all this way to teach one boy." "I believe every child deserves an education, Mr. James, regardless of where they live." She followed him toward the house, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. "And your letter mentioned your son has a quick mind." Something in his expression softened slightly. "That he does. Too quick sometimes." He paused at the door. "Miss Blackwell, I should warn you. Samuel hasn't spoken much since his mother passed last year. Don't take it personal if he doesn't warm up right away." Abigail nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "I understand loss, Mr. James. I won't push him." The interior of the house was surprisingly well kept for a home without a woman's touch. Simple but clean furnishings filled the main room, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Ethan set her trunk down and called out, "Samuel, come meet Miss Blackwell." A small figure appeared at the top of the stairs, hesitating before slowly making his way down. The boy had his father's blue eyes, but his features were finer, his hair a lighter shade of brown. He stopped on the bottom step, regarding Abigail with a solemn expression that seemed too old for his young face. "Samuel, this is Miss Blackwell. She's come all the way from Boston to be your teacher." Ethan's voice was gentle when he addressed his son, revealing a tenderness that contrasted with his rugged exterior. Abigail smiled warmly, bending slightly to meet the boy's eyes. "Hello, Samuel. I'm very pleased to meet you." The boy looked at her, then at his father, before giving a small nod. It wasn't much, but Abigail counted it as a start. "I'll show you to your room," Ethan said. "You can rest a bit before supper. Samuel, why don't you help Mrs. Henderson in the kitchen?" As the boy disappeared through a doorway, Ethan picked up her trunk again. "Mrs. Henderson comes in from town 3 times a week to help with cooking and such. She'll be here today and tomorrow, then back on Friday." Abigail followed him up the stairs, suddenly aware of the vast difference between her life in Boston and what lay ahead. "Mr. James, I should tell you that while I'm experienced in teaching academic subjects, I may need some time to adjust to country life." He glanced back at her, and for a moment she thought she saw amusement in his eyes. "City folk usually do, Miss Blackwell. But don't worry, we don't expect you to wrangle cattle or break horses. Just teach my boy and maybe help him find his voice again." Her room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small desk beneath a window that overlooked the sprawling ranch. In the distance, she could see men working with cattle in a pen, and beyond that the mountains rose majestic against the sky. "It's lovely," she said, genuinely impressed by the view. "Glad you think so." Ethan set down her trunk. "Supper's at 6, schoolroom's downstairs, last door on the left. I've put in some books and such, but you'll let me know what else you need." "Thank you, Mr. James. I will." He lingered in the doorway for a moment. "Miss Blackwell, I want to be straight with you. This isn't Boston. Life's harder here, but it's good in its way. I hope you'll give it and Samuel a fair chance before deciding it's not for you." The sincerity in his voice touched her. "I will, Mr. James. I promise." After he left, Abigail sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the simple quilt. She thought of the quiet boy with sad eyes and his father, a man clearly carrying the weight of grief on his shoulders. This wasn't what she had imagined when she'd boarded the train in Boston, but perhaps it was exactly where she needed to be. The next morning, Abigail rose with the sun, determined to make a good impression on her first day. She dressed in her most practical gown, navy blue with a modest white collar, and pinned her auburn hair in a simple chignon. When she descended to the kitchen, she found Ethan already there, drinking coffee at the table while Samuel quietly ate porridge. "Good morning," she said brightly. Ethan stood, a gesture of respect that surprised her. "Morning, Miss Blackwell. Coffee?" "Yes, thank you." She took the offered cup and sat across from Samuel. "Are you ready for our first lesson today?" The boy looked up from his bowl, studying her for a long moment before giving a small nod. "Samuel's been doing his sums and reading on his own," Ethan explained, resuming his seat. "His mother taught him until—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "Well, I'm impressed that you've continued your studies, Samuel," Abigail said, addressing the boy directly. "That shows real dedication." For a brief moment, something like pride flickered in the boy's eyes. "I need to head out to the north pasture today," Ethan said, finishing his coffee. "We've got cattle to move before the weather turns. I'll be back by supper." After breakfast, Abigail followed Samuel to the schoolroom. It was a small but well-lit space, with a sturdy desk and chair for Samuel and a larger one for her. Bookshelves lined one wall, half filled with an eclectic collection of volumes, some children's stories, reference books, and several classics. "Your father mentioned you enjoy reading," Abigail said, running her fingers along the spines. "Which is your favorite?" Samuel hesitated, then walked to the shelf and pulled out a well-worn copy of Robinson Crusoe. "Ah, adventure. An excellent choice." She smiled, taking the book. "My father used to read this to me when I was about your age." For the first time, curiosity seemed to spark in the boy's expression. "Shall we start with some reading, then?" she suggested, and he nodded, taking his seat at the desk. The morning passed quickly as Abigail assessed Samuel's abilities. Despite his silence, he was remarkably bright, with a good grasp of reading and basic mathematics. His writing needed work, but his comprehension was excellent. When they took a break at midday, Abigail felt a growing respect for this quiet, thoughtful child who had clearly persevered despite his loss. "You did very well this morning, Samuel," she told him as they walked to the kitchen for lunch. "I'm looking forward to our geography lesson this afternoon." To her surprise, he reached out and briefly touched her hand, as if to say thank you, before darting ahead into the kitchen. Mrs. Henderson, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, was setting out sandwiches. "There you are. How'd the schooling go?" "Very well," Abigail replied, smiling at Samuel. "Your son is quite the scholar, Mrs. Henderson." The older woman chuckled. "Oh, he's not mine, dear. My boys are all grown with children of their own. I just come to help Mr. James with the cooking and cleaning." Been doing it since poor Mrs. James passed. I see. Abigail felt embarrassed by her mistake. I'm sorry for the confusion. No harm done. Mrs. Henderson patted her arm. Now eat up, both of you. Growing minds need nourishment. During lunch, Abigail tried to engage Samuel in conversation, asking simple yes or no questions that he could answer with a nod or shake of his head. Though he remained silent, she sensed he was listening intently to everything she said. In the afternoon, they explored a large map of the United States that Abigail had brought with her. Samuel showed particular interest in the Western Territories, tracing the routes of rivers and mountain ranges with his finger. Have you ever traveled outside of Wyoming? Abigail asked before remembering he wasn't speaking. I'm sorry, that's not a yes or no question. To her surprise, Samuel picked up a slate and chalk, wrote no in careful letters, then added, Have you? Abigail's heart leaped at this small communication. Yes, I was born in Massachusetts, but I've visited New York, Pennsylvania, and even once to Washington City before coming here. Samuel wrote again. What is the ocean like? It's magnificent, she answered, her voice softening with memory. Endless blue water as far as you can see, with waves that crash against the shore. The air smells of salt, and if you're lucky, you might spot ships on the horizon coming from far-off lands. The boy's eyes widened and he wrote, I want to see it someday. Perhaps you will, she said gently. The world is full of wonders waiting to be discovered. When the lesson ended, Samuel surprised her by writing thank you on his slate before carefully putting away his books. That evening, when Ethan returned, dusty and tired from his day's work, Abigail was eager to share the progress. Samuel communicated with me today, she told him as they sat at the dinner table. He wrote on his slate. Ethan's head snapped up, his gaze moving to his son. Is that so? Samuel ducked his head, suddenly interested in his plate of stew. That's good news. Ethan's voice was rough with emotion. What did you talk about? Geography, Abigail said, sensing Samuel's shyness. And the ocean. Samuel expressed interest in seeing it someday. Did he now? Ethan looked at his son with a mixture of surprise and something like hope. Well, maybe someday we'll take a trip east, son. For the briefest moment, Samuel's eyes met his father's, and Abigail witnessed something pass between them, a connection that had perhaps been dormant since the loss of the boy's mother. After Samuel had gone to bed, Abigail lingered in the kitchen, helping to wash the dishes. Ethan dried them, his movements methodical. Miss Blackwell, he said finally, I don't know what you did today, but thank you. I didn't do anything special, Mr. James. Samuel is an exceptional child. He just needed someone to listen. Ethan set down the plate he was drying, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. His mother, Catherine, was taken by fever last spring. Samuel was with her at the end. He hasn't spoken a word since. Abigail's heart ached for both father and son. I'm so sorry. The doctor in town says it's a kind of shock, that his voice will come back when he's ready. Ethan shook his head. But sometimes I worry that it never will, Abigail finished softly. I believe it will, Mr. James. He's already reaching out in his own way. Give him time. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. You've given me hope today, Miss Blackwell. That's no small thing. Under his intense gaze, Abigail felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the kitchen stove. Good night, Mr. James, she said, suddenly needing to retreat. Good night, Miss Blackwell. His voice followed her up the stairs, settling somewhere in her chest like an ember. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Each morning, Abigail and Samuel would spend hours in the schoolroom, exploring literature, mathematics, science, and history. The boy continued to communicate through writing, his notes becoming longer and more complex. In the afternoons, when weather permitted, they would venture outside for natural studies identifying plants, observing insects, or sketching the magnificent landscape. Ethan was often away during the day, managing the ranch with his small crew of cowboys, but he made a point of asking about Samuel's progress each evening. Abigail found herself looking forward to these conversations, to the way Ethan's face would light up at news of his son's achievements. One crisp October afternoon, about 3 weeks after Abigail's arrival, she decided to take Samuel's lessons outdoors. They settled under a large cottonwood tree near the creek that ran through the property. "Today," she said, opening a book of poetry, "I thought we might try something different. Poetry can help us express feelings that are sometimes difficult to put into everyday words." Samuel looked skeptical but took the book when she offered it. "This one is by William Wordsworth," she explained. "It's about the beauty of nature and how it stays with us even when we're away from it." As she read, "I wandered lonely as a cloud," Samuel's expression changed from doubt to interest. When she finished, she asked him to write his thoughts on his slate. He considered for a moment, then wrote. The flowers in his mind are like memories of Mom. Abigail had to blink back sudden tears. "Yes, Samuel, that's a beautiful observation. Memories are precious things that we can carry with us always." He nodded, then wrote something else. "Do you have sad memories too?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes," she admitted. "I lost my parents when I was 16. They died in a carriage accident." Samuel's eyes widened and he wrote, "Who took care of you? My aunt for a while, but she wasn't well. When I turned 18, I began teaching at a school for girls in Boston. That became my home." She smiled gently. "We've both known loss, Samuel, but we've also found ways to continue." The boy studied her face, then wrote deliberately, "I'm glad you came here." Those simple words touched her deeply. "I'm glad too, Samuel." They were walking back to the house when they spotted Ethan riding toward them, his horse at a canter. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his expression troubled. "Miss Blackwell, there's been an accident in town. Mrs. Henderson's husband fell from a roof he was repairing. She's gone to tend to him, but she won't be able to come for a while." "I'm so sorry to hear that," Abigail said. "Is there anything we can do? I've sent one of the men with food and supplies." Ethan removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "But I'm afraid we'll have to manage without her help for a time." "Well," Abigail said practically, "I may not be Mrs. Henderson, but I can certainly prepare meals. My cooking may not be fancy, but it's edible." The corner of Ethan's mouth lifted slightly. "Edible is all we ask, Miss Blackwell." Samuel tugged at Abigail's sleeve, holding up his slate. "I can help too." Ethan read the words, his expression softening. "That's mighty thoughtful, son." That evening, Abigail and Samuel worked together in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and ham. Though she had limited experience cooking on a wood stove, Abigail found Samuel to be an unexpectedly knowledgeable assistant, showing her where ingredients were kept and how hot the stove should be for different dishes. When Ethan came in from the barn, the smell of fresh cornbread filled the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway, watching as Abigail and Samuel set the table together, a comfortable camaraderie between them. "Something smells good," he said, removing his hat. Abigail turned, a streak of flour on her cheek. "Samuel has been an excellent helper. Did you know he's quite knowledgeable about cooking?" "Is that so?" Ethan hung his hat on a peg by the door. "His mother started teaching him young, said every man should know his way around a kitchen." "She was a wise woman," Abigail said softly. During dinner, Abigail noticed Ethan watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. There was something in his gaze that made her pulse quicken, a warmth that hadn't been there before. As the weeks passed, Abigail found herself taking on more household duties in Mrs. Henderson's absence. She and Samuel established a routine: mornings for lessons, afternoons for chores and more practical education. She taught him about literature and mathematics, and he showed her how to churn butter and tend the kitchen garden. Ethan observed these changes with quiet appreciation. One evening, as Abigail was knitting by the fire after Samuel had gone to bed, he joined her in the sitting room. "You've settled in well," he remarked, taking the chair opposite hers. "Better than I expected, if I'm being honest." Abigail smiled, her needles continuing their steady rhythm. "I've surprised myself as well. I never imagined I'd find such satisfaction in churning butter or gathering eggs." "It's a different life from Boston." "Yes, but there's a clarity to it. Everything has purpose here. In Boston, much of society seemed built on pretense." She paused, looking up at him. "I hope that doesn't sound naive." "Not at all." His eyes reflected the firelight. "It's how I've always felt about this place. It's real in a way cities aren't." They fell into comfortable silence, the only sounds the clicking of her knitting needles and the crackling of the fire. "Miss Blackwell," he said finally, "I received a letter from Mrs. Henderson today. Her husband is improving, but it will be at least another month before she can return." "I'm glad he's recovering," Abigail said sincerely. "And please don't worry about the household. Samuel and I are managing well." "That's not my concern." Ethan leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "You were hired as a governess, not a housekeeper. I don't want you feeling obligated to take on work that wasn't part of our agreement." "I don't mind, truly." She set her knitting aside. "Besides, it's good for Samuel to see that learning happens everywhere, not just in books." Ethan studied her face in the firelight. "You're good for him, Miss Blackwell. I haven't seen him this engaged since before Catherine died." The compliment warmed her more than she cared to admit. "He's a remarkable boy, Mr. James. It's a privilege to teach him." "Ethan," he said suddenly. "Please call me Ethan. Mr. James makes me feel like my father." She smiled, feeling a strange fluttering in her chest. "Then you must call me Abigail." "Abigail," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. "It suits you." The following Sunday, Ethan suggested they all attend church in town. It would be Abigail's first visit to Sweetwater Springs since her arrival. She dressed with care in her best blue dress, helping Samuel with his tie before they set out in the wagon. Sweetwater Springs was a small but growing community, with a main street lined with businesses: a general store, a bank, a saloon, and several other establishments. The white clapboard church stood at one end of the street, its steeple rising above the other buildings. As they approached, Abigail felt suddenly nervous. "Will there be many people?" she asked. "Most of the town comes to Sunday service," Ethan replied, helping her down from the wagon. "Been a while since Samuel and I attended ourselves." Inside, the church was nearly full. Heads turned as they entered, curious glances directed at Abigail. Ethan led them to a pew near the back, Samuel between them. Throughout the service, Abigail was aware of the occasional glance or whisper. When it ended, several people approached them, introducing themselves with the frank curiosity of a small community. "So you're the teacher Mr. James hired for young Samuel," said a plump woman with kind eyes. "I'm Martha Wilson, the doctor's wife." "Pleased to meet you," Abigail replied, shaking her hand. "And how are you finding our little corner of Wyoming?" asked an older gentleman who introduced himself as Judge Parker. "It's beautiful," Abigail said sincerely. "The landscape is unlike anything I've seen before." "Miss Blackwell comes from Boston," Ethan explained, his hand resting protectively on Samuel's shoulder. "Boston!" exclaimed a young woman with elaborately styled blonde hair. "My goodness, what brings you all the way out here?" Her tone held a note of incredulity that bordered on rudeness. "The opportunity to teach," Abigail answered simply, "and to experience a different part of our country." "Well, I'm sure it must be quite an adjustment," the woman said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I'm Vivian Cooper. My father owns the bank." She turned to Ethan, her manner changing entirely. "Ethan, it's been too long since you've come to town. We've missed seeing you at our Sunday dinners." Abigail noticed the proprietary way Vivian placed her hand on Ethan's arm and felt an unexpected twinge of something she didn't care to examine. "Been busy with the ranch," Ethan replied, his tone polite but distant. "Abigail, Samuel, and I usually have dinner at the hotel restaurant after church. Would you care to join us?" Vivian's smile tightened at his use of Abigail's first name. "I'd like that, thank you," Abigail replied, oddly pleased by the flash of annoyance on Vivian's face. The hotel dining room was crowded but pleasant, with white tablecloths and surprisingly good food. As they ate, Ethan pointed out various townsfolk, giving Abigail a brief history of Sweetwater Springs. "Town's only been here about 15 years, he explained. "Started as a trading post, then grew when they found silver in the hills. The boom didn't last, but enough people stayed to build a community." "How long has your ranch been here?" Abigail asked. "My father established it 20 years ago. I was just a boy when we came west from Missouri." His expression grew distant. He had a vision of what this land could be. "And you've carried on that vision," he nodded slowly. "Tried to. It hasn't always been easy, but it's a good life." Samuel, who had been quietly eating his roast beef, suddenly tapped Abigail's arm. He pointed discreetly toward a table in the corner where Vivian Cooper sat with an older couple, her gaze frequently drifting toward their table. Abigail suppressed a smile. "Yes, I noticed too," she whispered. Ethan followed their glance and sighed. "Vivian's father has been trying to match us up for years," he explained quietly. "I've never encouraged it, but she's persistent." "She's very beautiful," Abigail observed, feeling compelled to state the obvious. "Beauty isn't everything," Ethan replied, his eyes meeting hers across the table. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, Samuel falling asleep against Abigail's shoulder as the wagon rumbled along the dusty road. Ethan glanced over at them, his expression softening at the sight. "He trusts you," he said quietly. "That doesn't come easy for him." "The feeling is mutual," Abigail replied, gently smoothing the boy's hair. When they arrived home, Ethan carried the sleeping Samuel to his room while Abigail prepared for bed herself. Later, unable to sleep, she stood by her window, gazing out at the vast night sky. The stars seemed impossibly bright and close, the Milky Way a luminous band across the darkness. A movement below caught her attention. Ethan, walking slowly toward the barn, his figure silhouetted against the moonlit landscape. He stopped midway, tilting his head back to look at the same stars she was watching. In that moment, despite the distance between them, Abigail felt strangely connected to this quiet, complex man who carried his grief with such dignity. She wondered what it would be like to stand beside him under that star-filled sky, to share the beauty and vastness of this place that was becoming more like home with each passing day. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. As October gave way to November, the air grew sharper, the mornings often frosted. Abigail and Samuel continued their lessons, but now they included more practical skills: how to preserve food for winter, the basics of animal care, even simple carpentry. Samuel's confidence grew daily, though he still didn't speak aloud. One afternoon, as they were finishing a science lesson about weather patterns, Samuel wrote on his slate, "Will you leave when winter comes?" The question caught Abigail by surprise. "No, Samuel." My agreement with your father was for at least a year. I'm not planning to leave anytime soon. Relief washed over the boy's face, followed by a new question. Do you like it here? Very much, she answered truthfully. I've grown quite fond of this place, and the people in it. Samuel studied her face, then wrote with deliberate care. I think Pa likes having you here too. Abigail felt her cheeks warm. Well, I hope I'm doing a satisfactory job teaching you. The boy rolled his eyes in a very 9-year-old fashion, clearly indicating that wasn't what he meant, but he didn't press the point. That evening, Ethan returned from a trip to a neighboring ranch with news. Cattle buyer from Chicago's coming through next week, he announced at dinner. Wants to see our stock before the snow flies. Is that good news? Abigail asked, passing him the cornbread. Could be. If he likes what he sees, we might get a contract for spring calves. Ethan's expression was cautiously optimistic. It would mean some stability for the ranch. Samuel wrote on the small slate he now carried everywhere. Can I help with the cattle? Ethan grinned. Thought you might ask. Yes, you can help, but only from the fence. Those steers are too big for you to handle yet. The boy beamed, writing again. Can Miss Abigail come too? Ethan glanced at Abigail, amusement in his eyes. That's up to Miss Abigail. Not every lady wants to spend her day watching cows. I'd be interested to see the ranch operation, Abigail said, surprising herself with her eagerness. If I wouldn't be in the way. Never in the way, Ethan replied, his voice softening in a manner that made her pulse quicken. The day of the cattle buyer's visit dawned clear and cold. Abigail dressed warmly in her sturdiest skirt and boots, wrapping a woolen shawl around her shoulders. Samuel was already at the breakfast table when she came down, his excitement evident in his restless energy. Ethan entered from outside, bringing a gust of cold air with him. Cattle are gathered in the south pasture, he reported. Jake and the boys have them sorted and ready. After a quick breakfast, they rode out in the wagon, Samuel sandwiched between Abigail and Ethan on the seat. The south pasture was about a mile from the house, a large fenced area where several dozen cattle grazed peacefully. 3 cowboys on horseback kept the herd contained, while a 4th opened a gate to a smaller corral. Ethan helped Abigail down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Mr. Harrison should be here soon, he said, his breath visible in the cold air. In the meantime, I'll show you what we're doing. As they walked toward the corral fence, he explained the breeding program he'd been developing, selecting cattle for specific traits: hardiness, good meat production, docile temperament. These are the result of 5 years' work, he said with quiet pride, indicating the large, healthy-looking animals. Better than anything my father raised, and he was considered one of the best stockmen in the territory. They're impressive, Abigail said, meaning it. Though she knew little about cattle, even she could see these were exceptional animals. Samuel climbed onto the bottom rail of the fence for a better view, pointing excitedly at a young bull separated from the others. That's Thunder, Ethan explained. Samuel named him last spring when he was born during a storm. He's the offspring of my best bull and cow. Could be the foundation of our next breeding line. Abigail watched as Samuel gazed admiringly at the young animal, seeing the connection between boy and beast. He has your eye for quality, she observed. Ethan nodded, his expression proud. He does at that. Catherine always said he was born to be a rancher. The sound of approaching hooves announced the arrival of the cattle buyer, a portly man in an expensive coat, accompanied by one of Ethan's cowboys. Mr. Harrison, Ethan greeted him, extending his hand. Welcome to the Rocking J. James, Harrison replied, dismounting with a grunt. These the Shorethorns you wrote about? Yes, sir. Best bloodlines in the territory. Harrison adjusted his spectacles, peering critically at the cattle. Let's have a closer look, then. For the next hour, Ethan and Harrison inspected the animals, discussing weights, feed conversion, and other details that were beyond Abigail's understanding. Samuel followed them attentively, clearly absorbing everything. At one point, Harrison asked a question about the cattle's winter feeding habits, and Samuel quickly wrote the answer on his slate, tugging at Ethan's sleeve to show him. "My son has the right of it," Ethan said, reading the slate. "We supplement the hay with a grain mixture I developed. Keeps their weight up through the worst of winter." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Smart boy you've got there, James, and quiet too, a rare combination." He looked at Abigail. "And this is Mrs. James, I presume?" Before Abigail could correct him, Ethan said smoothly, "This is Miss Blackwell, Samuel's teacher. She's been with us since September." "Ah, a governess from back east by your accent?" Harrison asked Abigail. "Yes, from Boston originally," she replied. "Well, Miss Blackwell, you're getting quite an education yourself out here, I'd wager." Harrison turned back to Ethan. "I like what I see, James. Let's talk numbers." As the men moved away to discuss business, Samuel tugged at Abigail's hand, leading her to the fence where Thunder stood watching them curiously. "He's beautiful," Abigail said, admiring the young bull's glossy coat and clear eyes. Samuel nodded enthusiastically, writing, "Pa says he's special. Going to make our herd famous." "Your father is very proud of what he's built here," Abigail observed, "and proud of you too." The boy's expression grew thoughtful. He wrote slowly, "Sometimes I think he's sad that I don't talk." Abigail's heart ached at the perception in this young boy. "Samuel, your father loves you exactly as you are. He's not sad about you, he just wants you to be happy." Samuel considered this, then wrote, "I am happier now that you're here." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes. "I'm happier too, Samuel." The business concluded successfully, with Harrison agreeing to purchase a substantial number of spring calves at a premium price. As they rode back to the house, Ethan was in high spirits. "This contract changes everything," he told Abigail. "With guaranteed sales, we can expand the herd, maybe even build that new barn I've been planning." "I'm so pleased for you," Abigail said, genuinely happy for his success. Samuel, seated between them, wrote on his slate, "Can we celebrate?" Ethan laughed, a rich, warm sound that Abigail realized she'd rarely heard. "Yes, son, we can celebrate. What did you have in mind?" Samuel considered, then wrote, Pie it is," Ethan agreed. "Miss Abigail, would you be willing to help with that endeavor?" "I'm afraid my pie-making skills are non-existent." "I would be delighted," she replied, already mentally inventorying the ingredients they had on hand. "Apple or berry?" "Apple," Samuel wrote decisively. That evening, after a hearty dinner, they enjoyed thick slices of apple pie topped with fresh cream. The kitchen was warm and fragrant, the atmosphere relaxed and celebratory. As Abigail cleared the plates, Ethan stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Leave those for now," he said. "I have something to show you both." Curious, Abigail and Samuel followed him to the sitting room, where he opened a drawer in his desk and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I've been saving this," he explained, handing it to Samuel. "Seems like tonight's the right time." Samuel unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small wooden box. Inside was a pocket watch, its silver case gleaming in the lamplight. "It was your grandfather's," Ethan said, his voice low with emotion. "He gave it to me when I turned 10. I've been waiting for the right moment to pass it on to you." Samuel stared at the watch, his fingers tracing the engraved pattern on its cover. Then, to Abigail's astonishment, he looked up at his father and whispered, "Thank you, Pa." The words were barely audible, rough from disuse but unmistakable. Ethan froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Samuel," he breathed. The boy swallowed hard, then said again, a little stronger, "Thank you." Ethan fell to his knees before his son, gathering him into a fierce embrace. "You're welcome, son. You're so welcome." Abigail pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming unchecked down her cheeks as she witnessed this miraculous moment. Father and son clung to each other, both crying now, years of silence finally broken. After a long moment, Ethan pulled back enough to look into his son's face. "Your voice. I've missed it so much." "I'm sorry," Samuel whispered. "It was stuck." "No apologies needed," Ethan assured him, his voice thick with emotion. "You take all the time you need." Samuel turned to Abigail, his blue eyes swimming with tears. "Miss Abigail," he said carefully, as if testing the feel of her name on his tongue. "Don't cry." She laughed through her tears, opening her arms to him. He came to her readily, wrapping his small arms around her waist. "These are happy tears, Samuel. The happiest." Over the boy's head, her eyes met Ethan's. The look he gave her was one of such profound gratitude, such open emotion that it stole her breath. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since her arrival. Later, after Samuel had gone to bed, exhausted but exhilarated by the eventful day, Abigail and Ethan sat before the fire, the silence between them comfortable yet charged with unspoken thoughts. "I don't know how to thank you," Ethan said finally, his voice low. "You don't need to thank me," Abigail replied. "Samuel did the hard work himself, but he wouldn't have without you." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You brought something back to this house that I thought was gone forever." "What's that?" she asked softly. "Hope," he answered simply. "Light." The weight of his words settled around her like a cloak. "Ethan, he held up a hand, stopping her. "I know this isn't what you signed on for. You came to teach my son not to become tangled in our lives." "I don't feel tangled," she said carefully. "I feel connected." His eyes, so blue in the firelight, searched hers. "Is that enough?" "This isn't Boston, Abigail. It's a hard life out here, especially for a woman used to city comforts." "I haven't missed those comforts," she told him honestly. "I've found something here that I never had in Boston." "What's that?" "Purpose. Belonging." She hesitated, then added softly, "Family." Something in Ethan's expression shifted, a vulnerability appearing that he rarely allowed to show. "When Catherine died, I thought that part of my life was over." "I never expected." "Neither did I," Abigail admitted. "When I answered your advertisement, I was simply looking for employment, a place to use my skills. I never imagined I would find this." "And what is this, exactly?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Abigail took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "A place where I feel truly myself, people I've come to care for deeply." She met his gaze steadily. "A man who makes me think about possibilities I'd long since abandoned." Ethan stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out into the darkness. When he spoke, his back was to her. "I'm 10 years your senior, Abigail, a widower with a son, a rancher tied to this land as surely as if I were rooted to it. Are those reasons why I shouldn't care for you?" she asked quietly. "Or reasons why you believe you shouldn't care for me?" He turned to face her, his expression conflicted. "Both, perhaps. I've known loss, Abigail. It nearly destroyed me once. I don't know if I have the courage to risk my heart again." "And yet," she said, rising to stand before him, "here we are." They stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the rapid pulse at the base of his throat. When he raised his hand to touch her cheek, she leaned into his palm instinctively. "I never expected you," he murmured. "You turned everything upside down." "Is that a bad thing?" she whispered. His answer was to lower his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she rose on her toes to meet him, their lips touching in a kiss so gentle it was hardly more than a whisper. When they parted, his eyes searched hers, a question in their depths. In answer, she wound her arms around his neck and drew him down for another kiss, this one deeper, more certain. His arms encircled her waist, holding her as if she were something precious and fragile. When they finally separated, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said softly. "Yes," she agreed, "but not all change is to be feared." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his face, making him look younger, unburdened. "No, not all change. Some is to be welcomed." The winter of 1876-1877 was one of the harshest in memory. Snow began falling in late November and continued intermittently through February, piling high around the ranch house and making travel difficult. Yet within those snow-bound walls, a transformation was taking place. Samuel's speech returned fully, though he still had moments of quiet thoughtfulness that Abigail suspected would always be part of his nature. His education continued, now enhanced by lively discussions, and the sound of his laughter, a sound that seemed to breathe new life into the old house. Ethan and Abigail's relationship deepened with each passing day. They were careful to maintain propriety for Samuel's sake, and because of their isolated situation. But their feelings were impossible to hide, especially from a perceptive 9-year-old, who observed them with growing satisfaction. One evening in early December, as they sat by the fire after Samuel had gone to bed, Ethan took Abigail's hand in his. "I've been thinking," he began, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "A dangerous pastime," she teased gently. He smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "I know we haven't spoken much about the future. I wanted to give you time to be certain about this life." Abigail felt her heart quicken. "And now I find myself unwilling to imagine a future without you in it." He met her gaze directly. "I love you, Abigail. I think I've loved you since that first day when you stood in my yard looking both terrified and determined." Joy flooded through her at his words. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've tried to be sensible, to remember that I came here as Samuel's teacher, but love isn't sensible," he finished for her. "No, it isn't." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "And I'm glad of it." Ethan shifted to kneel before her, still holding her hand. "Abigail Blackwell, would you consider becoming Abigail James? Would you make this house your permanent home, be a mother to Samuel and a wife to me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes to all of it." His answering smile was radiant as he drew her into his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of a future bright with possibility. The next morning, they told Samuel over breakfast. The boy's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Finally," he exclaimed, jumping up to hug them both. "I was wondering when you'd ask her, Pa." Ethan laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "You knew this was coming, did you?" "Everyone knows," Samuel said with the wisdom of childhood. "Even Thunder probably figured it out." Abigail laughed, her heart so full it seemed impossible it could contain such happiness. "And how do you feel about it, Samuel? About me becoming part of your family officially?" The boy looked at her with serious blue eyes so like his father's. "You already are family, Miss Abigail. This just makes it so you can't leave." "I wasn't planning to leave anyway," she assured him, drawing him into a warm embrace. "Good," he said firmly, "because I like you here." Christmas that year was a modest but joyful affair. Despite the snow that isolated them from town, they managed to create a celebration that felt rich with meaning. Ethan cut a small pine tree from their land, and they decorated it with strings of dried berries, paper stars that Samuel made, and a few treasured ornaments that had belonged to Catherine. Abigail made gifts: a knitted scarf for Ethan, a journal for Samuel to record his observations of ranch life. Ethan surprised her with a delicate silver brooch he'd ordered from a catalog months earlier, and Samuel presented her with a carefully whittled wooden figurine of a woman teaching. "It's you," he explained, watching anxiously as she examined it. "Do you like it?" "It's beautiful, Samuel," she said, genuinely touched by the hours of work the gift represented. "I'll treasure it always." On New Year's Eve, with Samuel sleeping soundly upstairs, Ethan and Abigail sat before the fire, discussing their wedding plans. "I'd like Mrs. Henderson to be there," Abigail said, "and Judge Parker could perform the ceremony." "Whenever the snow lets up enough for travel," Ethan agreed, "though I confess I'm finding it harder each day to be patient." She blushed at the intensity in his gaze. "Spring isn't so far away." "An eternity," he murmured, drawing her closer on the sofa. January brought a brief thaw, allowing Ethan to make a trip to town for supplies and to announce their engagement officially. When he returned, he brought news that set their plans in motion faster than expected. "Judge Parker will be leaving for Cheyenne in March," he reported. "Won't be back until summer. If we want him to marry us, it needs to be before then." "Then February it is," Abigail decided, "assuming the weather cooperates." It did barely. The first weekend in February brought clear skies and temperatures mild enough to make the journey to town possible, if not comfortable. Mrs. Henderson, now returned to her duties at the ranch, insisted on hosting a small reception at her home after the ceremony. "It's not every day our most eligible bachelor gets married," she declared, "especially to such a lovely bride." The wedding itself was simple but meaningful. Judge Parker performed the ceremony in the town's small church, with Samuel standing proudly beside his father, and Mrs. Henderson and her husband as witnesses. Abigail wore her best blue dress, adorned with the silver brooch Ethan had given her, and carried a small bouquet of evergreen sprigs and dried flowers that Mrs. Henderson had somehow managed to assemble. When Judge Parker pronounced them husband and wife, and Ethan kissed her with gentle reverence before their small audience, Abigail felt a sense of rightness that transcended the humble surroundings. This was where she belonged with this man, this boy, in this wild, beautiful country that had become her home. The reception at the Hendersons was a lively affair, with several ranch hands and townspeople stopping by to offer congratulations. Even Vivian Cooper made an appearance, her congratulations stiff but polite. Abigail noted with amusement that the young woman seemed particularly interested in the new doctor who had recently arrived in town. As the celebration wound down, Samuel approached his father and new stepmother, his expression thoughtful. "Pa," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that, son?" Ethan asked, an arm around Abigail's waist. "Could I call Miss Abigail Ma now, or is that?" "Would that be all right?" Ethan looked to Abigail, letting her answer. With tears in her eyes, she knelt to Samuel's level. "I would be honored, Samuel, but only if you're comfortable with it. I know I can never replace your mother." "I know," he said solemnly. "But I think she'd want me to have a ma, and I think she'd like that it's you." Abigail drew him into a tight embrace, her heart overflowing. "Then yes, you may call me Ma." Samuel hugged her back, then looked up at his father. "Can we go home now, Pa? I want to show Ma the surprise." Ethan laughed. "I suppose the cat's out of the bag now. Yes, we can go home." Curious, Abigail allowed herself to be bundled into the wagon for the journey back to the ranch. The surprise, it turned out, was a newly furnished bedroom that Ethan and Samuel had been secretly preparing for her, their bedroom now. The heavy oak furniture gleamed with polish, and a beautiful handmade quilt in shades of blue and cream covered the bed. Samuel chose the colors, Ethan explained as she admired the quilt. Said they reminded him of the sky you're always watching. It's perfect, she whispered, deeply moved by the thought and care they'd put into creating this space for them. That night, after Samuel was asleep and she and Ethan were finally alone as husband and wife, Abigail found herself unexpectedly nervous. Ethan sensed her tension and took her hands in his. "We have all the time in the world," he assured her. "Nothing needs to happen that you're not ready for." His consideration only deepened her love for him. "It's not that," she said softly. "I'm just overwhelmed by how much my life has changed in a few short months, how much happiness I've found when I least expected it." Ethan smiled, drawing her closer. "I feel the same way. When you stepped off that stage in September, I had no idea you'd change everything. For the better, I hope," she murmured against his chest, "in every way." He tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. "I love you, Abigail James." The sound of her new name on his lips filled her with a profound sense of belonging. "And I love you, Ethan James, more than I ever thought possible." Their kiss sealed a promise that had begun months ago, when a Boston schoolteacher had arrived at a Wyoming ranch to teach a silent boy, and had found, instead, a family and a love worth crossing a continent for. As winter gave way to spring, life on the rocking J settled into a new rhythm. Abigail continued teaching Samuel, but now their lessons often extended beyond the schoolroom to include the practical aspects of ranch management. Ethan included them both in discussions about the cattle, the land, the future of the ranch. March brought the first calves, and April saw the arrival of Harrison, the cattle buyer, to inspect the new crop. He was impressed not only with the calves but with the obvious changes in the James household. "Marriage suits you, James," he remarked as they walked among the young animals. "And fatherhood seems to agree with young Samuel as well." "I'm a fortunate man," Ethan replied simply, watching as Abigail and Samuel examined a newborn calf a short distance away. By May, Abigail had fully embraced her role as rancher's wife, learning to ride properly, helping with the kitchen garden, and even assisting with the cattle when needed. Her Boston friends would hardly have recognized the confident woman, who now moved easily between the domestic and the practical demands of ranch life. One warm evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple, Samuel asked a question that caught them both by surprise. Ma," he said, looking up from the book he'd been reading, "do you think I might have a brother or sister someday?" Ethan nearly choked on his coffee while Abigail felt her cheeks flush. "Well," Ethan managed after a moment, "that's something your ma and I might discuss, I suppose." "I think it would be nice," Samuel continued, oblivious to their discomfort. "Jimmy Henderson has 3 brothers and a sister. He says it's noisy but fun." "I'm sure it is," Abigail replied, regaining her composure. "And yes, Samuel, it's something we might consider. In time." Later, when Samuel had gone to bed, Ethan found Abigail in their bedroom, brushing her hair before the mirror. He came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "So," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "Samuel wants siblings." "So it seems," she replied, setting down her brush. "What do you think about that idea?" Ethan turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I think I would love nothing more than to build a family with you, Abigail, but only if it's what you want too." She wound her arms around his neck, her heart full. "It is. I want everything with you, Ethan, the quiet moments, the hard work, the joys and sorrows, all of it." His kiss was tender, a promise of all that lay ahead, a future neither of them could have imagined when she first arrived at the Rocking J Ranch. The morning sunshine filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the bedroom as Abigail opened her eyes. Beside her, Ethan slept peacefully, one arm draped protectively over her waist. She studied his face, relaxed in sleep, the lines of worry and responsibility temporarily erased. A year had passed since their wedding. A year of challenges and triumphs, of settling into their life together. The ranch had prospered under their combined efforts, and Samuel had thrived, growing taller and more confident by the day. Now 10, almost 11, he was showing a natural aptitude for ranching that made Ethan beam with pride. And there was something else, something Abigail had confirmed with the doctor just yesterday during a rare trip to town alone. A secret she planned to share with Ethan today. As if sensing her thoughts, he stirred, his blue eyes opening to meet hers. "Good morning," he murmured, pulling her closer. "Good morning," she replied, nestling against him. "Happy anniversary," he smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "1 year, best year of my life." "Mine too." She hesitated, then added, "I have something for you, a gift." "Do you now?" He propped himself up on one elbow, looking intrigued. "I thought we agreed to keep things simple." "We did. This didn't cost anything." She took a deep breath, then placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "But it's quite valuable nonetheless." For a moment he stared at her in confusion. Then understanding dawned in his eyes, bright as the morning sun. "Abigail, are you?" She nodded, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "Yes, Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Ethan, in winter." His expression transformed from shock to wonder to pure joy. "A baby," he whispered, his hand still resting on her stomach. "Our baby." "Samuel's getting his wish," she said, laughing through her tears. "Though I don't know if he was expecting it quite so soon." Ethan gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." When they told Samuel later that morning, his reaction was everything they could have hoped for: excitement, curiosity, and a touching protectiveness toward Abigail that emerged immediately. "You shouldn't be lifting those heavy books, Ma," he declared, taking a stack of volumes from her arms. "Pa, shouldn't we get someone to help with the chores now?" Ethan struggled to maintain a serious expression. "I think your ma can manage for a while yet, son. The baby won't be here until winter." "Still," Samuel insisted, "we should take care of her." And they did, both of them, with a tenderness that sometimes brought Abigail to tears, though she blamed that on her condition rather than her emotions. The summer and fall passed in a blur of activity. The cattle thrived, the harvest from their expanded garden was abundant, and preparations for the baby occupied much of their spare time. Ethan built a cradle. Samuel collected soft wool from their sheep for Mrs. Henderson to spin into yarn for baby clothes, and Abigail sewed tiny garments in the evenings as her belly grew round with their child. Winter arrived early that year, with the first snow falling in late October. By December, Abigail's time was near, and Ethan insisted on bringing Mrs. Henderson to stay at the ranch until the baby arrived. "I'm not taking any chances," he declared when Abigail protested that it wasn't necessary yet. "If the snow gets too deep, Doctor Wilson might not be able to get here in time." His concern was justified. The night the baby decided to make its appearance, a fierce blizzard was raging, making travel from town impossible. Mrs. Henderson, who had assisted at many births, took charge with calm efficiency. "Don't you worry," she assured a frantic Ethan as she shooed him from the bedroom. "Women have been having babies without doctors since the beginning of time. Your wife is strong and healthy." Banished to the sitting room with Samuel, who refused to go to bed despite the late hour, Ethan paced like a caged animal, starting at every sound from upstairs. "Pa," Samuel said finally, "you're making me dizzy. Sit down." Ethan stopped, looking at his son with a mixture of amusement and anxiety. "When did you get so grown up?" Samuel shrugged. "Ma says babies come when they're ready, not when we're ready for them, so we just have to wait." "Your ma is a wise woman," Ethan replied, taking a seat beside his son. The waiting stretched through the night, the howling of the wind punctuated by occasional cries from upstairs that made Ethan's heart clench. Just as the first light of dawn was breaking through the storm clouds, Mrs. Henderson appeared at the top of the stairs. "Mr. James," she called, her face wreathed in smiles, "you and Samuel might want to come up now." They took the stairs two at a time, rushing to the bedroom where Abigail lay propped against pillows, her face tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Ethan, Samuel," she said softly, "come meet your daughter." Ethan approached the bed as if in a dream, his eyes fixed on the tiny face peeking from the blankets. When Abigail carefully transferred the baby to his arms, he held his breath, afraid to move. "She's so small," he whispered, awestruck. "But strong," Abigail assured him. "Mrs. Henderson says she has a good set of lungs." Samuel peered at his baby sister, his expression a mixture of curiosity and wonder. "What's her name?" Ethan and Abigail exchanged a look. They had discussed names but hadn't made a final decision. "What do you think we should call her?" Abigail asked Samuel. The boy considered this seriously, studying the infant's face. "Catherine," he said finally. "After my first ma, is that okay?" Tears filled Abigail's eyes as she reached for Samuel's hand. "It's perfect. Catherine it is." "Catherine Hope James," Ethan added, his voice thick with emotion. "Because that's what she brings us hope for the future." As the storm outside began to abate, the little family gathered close around their newest member, their hearts full of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment, a journey that had begun when a young woman from Boston had come to teach a cowboy's son, and had found, instead, a love that would last a lifetime. 7 years later, on a bright spring morning, Abigail James stood on the porch of the Rocking J Ranch, watching as Ethan demonstrated roping techniques to Samuel, now a tall, confident young man of 16, and their 6-year-old daughter Catherine, who insisted on doing everything her big brother did. Their youngest 4-year-old Michael sat beside Abigail on the steps, contentedly playing with a set of wooden farm animals Ethan had carved for him. "Mama, look," Catherine called, managing to throw her small lasso around a fence post. "I did it." "Well done, sweetheart." Abigail called back, smiling at her daughter's triumphant expression. Ethan caught her eye across the yard, his gaze still able to send a warmth through her after all these years. He said something to Samuel, then walked toward the porch, leaving the siblings to their practice. "She's determined," he remarked, dropping onto the step beside Abigail, "just like her mother." "I'll take that as a compliment," Abigail replied, leaning against his shoulder. It was meant as one. He put his arm around her, pulling her close. "I was just thinking about the day you arrived here. Remember how uncertain you looked?" "I was terrified," she admitted with a laugh. "I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. And now—" She looked around at the ranch, larger and more prosperous than when she'd first seen it, at Samuel, showing his sister how to adjust her grip on the rope, at Michael playing contentedly beside them. "Now I know it was the best decision I ever made," she said softly. "Even if I didn't realize it at the time." Ethan kissed her temple, his lips lingering against her skin. "When Samuel told me not to let you go, I thought he just liked having a teacher. I had no idea he was so much wiser than his pa." Abigail smiled, remembering those early days, the uncertainty, the gradual awakening of feelings, the moment she realized she had found her place in the world. He knew what we needed before we did, she agreed. A family, a home, a love worth crossing a continent for, Ethan murmured, echoing words she had once written in a letter to her former colleague in Boston. As they sat together, watching their children in the golden morning light, Abigail felt a profound gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought her to this place, this man, this life that had exceeded her wildest dreams. A life that had begun when she came to teach a cowboy's son, and he had whispered, "Don't let her go, Pa. I like her here."